the United States stands ready to find common ground with Russia as long as the two of us can engage seriously on those issues. We discussed, as Foreign Minister Lavrov said, many important topics. We talked about terrorism, we talked about Afghanistan. President Trump's made clear that his expectation is that we will have an improved relationship between our two countries. This will benefit each of our peoples, and I think that our talks here today were a good step in that direction. A few subjects that we talked about. Foreign Minister Lavrov mentioned that we spoke about Syria. We both want to move forward on the political track to bring the suffering of the Syrian people to an end, and we want to do so in a way that ensures that Syria will never again be a haven for Islamist terrorist groups. I also raised our concern about the escalation of the situation around Idlib in the northwest of Syria. We also discussed North Korea and its nuclear program. The United States and Russia agree on the goal of the denuclearization and will continue to discuss it. I underscored that we must maintain full implementation of the UN sanctions until the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea is achieved. And our two teams have been working very closely together on this in a very productive fashion. On Venezuela, we have disagreement. I urge my Russian colleagues to support the Venezuelan people as they return democracy to their country. The United States and more than 50 other nations agree that the time has come for Nicolas Maduro to go. He's brought nothing but misery to the Venezuelan people, and we hope that the Russians' support for Maduro will end. But despite our disagreements, we'll keep talking. I hope we can find a way forward that ends with the humanitarian political crisis that is happening. On this, we both agree. We also discussed the situation in Ukraine. The Trump administration has been clear that we do not recognize Russia's attempted annexation in Crimea, and we hope that we can continue to move forward. Our sanctions have remained in place. I urged Russia to reach out to Ukraine's new president to demonstrate leadership by taking steps towards breaking the stalemate. We would in particular welcome the release of the Ukrainian crewmen detained near the Kerch Strait last year, and we talked about implementation and how we might move forward in obtaining a ceasefire in the Donbas region. We spoke a bit about the activities that are taking place in the Middle East today, with particular focus on the actions that Iran is taking. I've made clear that the United States will continue to apply pressure to the regime in Tehran until its leadership is prepared to return to the ranks of responsible nations that do not threaten their neighbors or spread instability or terror. As Foreign Minister Lavrov alluded to, very much on President Trump's mind is arms control. Our actions on the INF Treaty have demonstrated that we're committed to effective arms control that advances U.S., allied, and partner security, that is verifiable and enforceable. The President has charged his national security team to think more broadly about arms control, to include countries beyond our traditional U.S.-Russia framework and a broader range of weapon systems. The President wants serious arms control that delivers real security to the American people, and we know, and I think we agree on this, to achieve these goals, we'll have to work together, and that it would be important that if it's possible, we get China involved as well. We'll have a more extensive set of conversations both around arms control and an opportunity to discuss all broad strategic security issues between our two countries in the weeks ahead. I also raised the issue of U.S. citizens who have been detained in Russia. Making sure that our citizens are not unjustly held abroad is one of President Trump's highest priorities. And we spoke, too, about the question of interference in our domestic affairs. I conveyed that there are things that Russia can do to demonstrate that these types of activities are a thing of the past, and I hope that Russia will take advantage of those opportunities. Finally, I want to emphasize the American friendship with the Russian people. Our two nations share proud histories and respect for one another's cultures. We seek a better relationship with Russia, and we urge that it work alongside us to change the trajectory of the relationship, which will benefit each of our peoples. Thank you, Sergey.
Dear colleagues, we're moving on to Q&A. Коммерсант, newspaper,
Добрый день, Владимир Соловьев, газета «Коммерсант».
Vladimir Solovьев,
Вы упомянули договор
Коммерсант,
СНВ, он
newspaper,
истекает
mentioned the New START treaty. which is
2021 году,
expiring
но
in
до сих пор не
2021,
ясно, будет
but
ли
it
он
is still
точно
unclear
и однозначно
whether
продлен.
it will
И в
be
этой связи вопрос к
surely
секретарю США,
prolonged.
готов ли
Therefore, the
Вашингтон
question to Secretary
продлить
Pompeo
соглашение еще на 5 лет,
is
как
Washington
то
prepared
предлагает
to
Москва,
extend New
и
START
готовы
treaty
ли
for
США
5 years,
обсуждать
as Moscow
претензии
is
России в рамках
proposing,
этого договора
whether
в
US is
части
prepared to
якобы
discuss
обратимой
concerns of
конверсии
Russia
пусковых
of
установок
that
и
conversion of
бомбардировщиков.
launchers
И
and
вопрос
heavy bombers as well.
Сергею Викторовичу Лаврову:
And the question to
если
Mr.
США не
Lavrov,
снимут
if
озабоченности
the US
российской
do not
стороны,
alleviate
будет ли Москва
concerns
по-прежнему
of
продолжать
Russia,
настаивать
will
на продлении
Moscow
договора? Спасибо.
continue to want to prolong the treaty? Thank you.
So Foreign Minister Lavrov raised the issue of concerns about compliance with New START today. We'll continue to work to allow that treaty to be verified exactly as the verification regime exists. As for its extension, what we've agreed that we will do is we will gather together teams that will begin to work not only on New START and its potential extension, but on a broader range of arms control issues that each of our two nations have, I think, in our shared best interest, achieving an agreement on.
Что касается нашей позиции, то
Now, as for
действительно у нас
our
есть
position,
озабоченности,
indeed, we
которые
have
касаются
concerns that have to do
заявленного Соединенными Штатами
claimed
переоборудования
refitting
пусковых установок
of the US
подводных
launchers
лодок
of
Trident
Trident,
и тяжелых
SLBMs, as well as heavy
бомбардировщиков
bombers,
из ядерного в неядерное оснащение.
of converting them to non-nuclear forces. The treaty foresees certain procedures that allow for the second party, should allow for the second party to verify that this conversion, refitting of equipment is done in such a way that it is impossible to return the nuclear warheads to the launchers on the bombers. We're discussing that at bilateral consultative commission, which oversees the implementation of the treaty. And we expect that this discussion will yield positive result in the end. As for the question what Russia will do if these concerns remain in place, I prefer not to respond to that, because right now we proceed from the assumption that we can agree within the bilateral consultative commission. And guessing, doing the guesswork, what will happen, what will not, that's possibly not the diplomatic task. Our task is to achieve a result, and that's what we will do.
Thanks. We're going to go to Guy Benson from Fox News.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up on Venezuela. Mr. Secretary, what was the message from the Trump administration specifically in regards to the Russian government and their continued support of Nicolas Maduro and their active involvement in the Western Hemisphere? And Mr. Foreign Minister, why is it the Russian government persists in supporting Mr. Maduro when virtually every democracy in Latin America has recognized Mr. Guaido as the legitimate interim leader of that country? Thank you.
Guy, we talked about this for some time. We made clear the U.S. position. We want every country that's interfering in Venezuela to cease doing that. We want the Venezuelan people to get their democracy back. We want them to have a fair, free election, elect their own leadership, not in the way that the sham election took place with Mr. Maduro. So whether it's Iranian forces or Chinese or Cubans, the Trump administration's position is that they all need to cease having an impact in supporting Maduro and allowing the Venezuelan people not only to get their democracy back, but give them an opportunity to rebuild this country that has tremendous wealth. There are Russian companies operating there that are successful businesses as well. We want those countries. We want that country to get a chance to rebuild its economy too, so that it isn't dependent on humanitarian assistance from anywhere in the world, but rather they can begin to deliver economic outcomes for themselves. And to do that, the central point is that we need free and fair elections there, not interfered by any other nation.
Что касается нашей позиции,
As for our position, and in response to your question,
почему Россия занимает именно
why Russia is taking
такую
such a
позицию
stance
в поддержку
in support of
диалога, рассмотрения
dialogue,
всех вопросов
of
самими
viewing
венесуэльцами,
all the
без
issues by
ультиматумов,
Venezuelans
без
themselves with no
предварительных условий.
ultimatums and no preconditions.
Ну, эта позиция, в общем-то, исходит из того,
Well,
что
this position
демократию силой не
stems from the
устанавливают.
fact that democracy cannot be
Угрозы, которые звучат в адрес
done by
правительства
force.
Мадуро,
The threats that we hear
угрозы,
against
которые
the
звучат
Maduro
из уст
government,
и
threats that
официальных
come
представителей
from the
администрации
mouths of
США и из
official
уст
representatives
господина
of the U.S.
Гуайдо,
administration and from
который
Mr.
постоянно
Guaido,
напоминает о своем
who
праве
always mentions his right to invite military intervention from outside. This has nothing in common with democracy. We remember back in 2003, I think that was May, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, on the board of aircraft carrier, declared the democracy in Iraq. We remember 2011. It was declared that the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, was ousted, and now Libya is a democracy. I don't think I should go into more detail on how the democracy feels itself in Iraq and Libya and other places where such attempts of coup d'etat took place and it brought nothing good about.
Пожалуйста, Россия 24.
Russia 24 channel,
Спасибо, Наталья Литовка, телеканал «Россия-24».
Litовka,
Вопрос
Russia
обоим
24
министрам
channel.
по
Question to
возможной
both
личной
ministers
встрече Владимира
about
Путина
possible
и
personal
Дональда
meeting
Трампа.
between President
Противоречивая
Putin and
поступает
President Trump.
информация здесь. Не могли бы вы
Contradictory information
прояснить,
there.
состоится
Could you
ли
please
такая
clarify
встреча? Вот
whether
звучит,
such a
возможно, Осака,
meeting will take
или нет,
place,
планируется она
with
когда и
about
где.
Osaka,
И если
but
можно,
is it
второй вопрос
planned
господину
and when and
Помпео.
where?
Вот
The
вы
second
только
question
что
to
вернулись
Secretary
из
Pompeo.
Брюсселя,
We
где
just
обсуждали
came back
с
from Brussels,
европейскими
where
коллегами
discussed
ядерную
with
сделку
European
с
colleagues
Ираном.
nuclear deal
Ну,
with
последние
Iran.
новости про возможную
latest
переброску
news about
войск на Ближний Восток выглядят тревожно. Означает ли это, что Вашингтон выбрал силовую линию в отношении с Ираном, и другой быть не может? И едины ли в этом с вами ваши европейские партнеры? Спасибо.
European leaders on board with you on that?
Ну, мы, естественно, слышали
Well, naturally, we heard statements by President Trump that he expects to hold a meeting with President Putin,
в рамках их участия в
including
саммите 20-ки в Осаке.
during the G20
Есть такое
summit in
предложение,
Osaka. We heard a
официально
proposal.
поступит, мы на
Well,
него, конечно
if
же,
we
позитивно
receive such
отреагируем.
an
Мы
official
сегодня говорили
invitation,
об
we'll
этом с
respond
Майком
positively,
Помпео.
and we talked about that today with Michael Pompeo.
Let me talk about my conversations in Brussels and then more broadly about United States policy with respect to the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I went to Brussels to share with our European friends the threats and concerns we have about actions that the Iranians are taking or potentially taking. And we wanted to make sure they understood the risks as we saw them, and I shared that with them in some detail. As for our policy, it's been consistent now for the entire Trump administration, and the decision to withdraw from the JCPOA now just over a year ago made clear what our objectives are. We laid them out in May of last year. We're looking for Iran to behave like a normal country, and that's our ask, and we have applied pressure to the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran to achieve that. We fundamentally do not seek a war with Iran. We're looking for the regime to simply stop conducting assassination campaigns throughout Europe, to cease their support of Hezbollah that threatens interests all across the Middle East, their support for the Houthis that are launching missiles into areas where there are Russians and Americans traveling. These missiles could easily kill a Russian or an American. We laid them out in some detail. Our position hasn't changed. And the movement of troops that you described, I'll leave to the Department of Defense, but we've also made clear to the Iranians that if American interests are attacked, we will most certainly respond in an appropriate fashion.
Sean Tandon, AFP.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your time. I wanted to follow up on a couple of statements you said. First, for Foreign Minister Lavrov, you mentioned that despite the disagreements with Iran, that there's a possibility of certain agreements on Iran going forward. Could you explain what you see in common with the U.S. and Iran, where you can go? Secretary Pompeo, if I could ask you about the mysterious incidents in the UAE regarding the oil tankers, have you pinpointed responsibility for that? And if I could follow up on your statement about the election, you said that there are things that Russia could do to show that election interference is a thing of the past. What are those things? What would you like Russia to do? Thank you very much.
Что касается ситуации вокруг Ирана, вокруг
As for situation around Iran and JCPOA,
иранской ядерной
on the
проблемы,
settlement of
то
Iranian
я
nuclear
надеюсь на то,
issue,
что разум
I hope
восторжествует,
that
то, что
reason will gain the upper
слухи
hand and
о
that
якобы
rumors
планируемом
about
направлении в
ostensibly
регион
planned
120-тысячной
of
армии
100,000,
Соединенных Штатов, о чем мы
120,000
сегодня
strong
говорили,
army of the
и
US
Майк
we spoke
сказал,
about
что это
today
дело
is
военных,
just a rumor,
что эти
and
слухи
Mike
не
said
имеют
that
под
it's
собой
a Ministry
оснований,
of
потому что
Defense thing,
регион и
and
так
these are just rumors which are baseless, because
перенапряжен
this
различными
region
конфликтными
is
ситуациями.
so
Мы,
tense with
кстати, в
different
скобках
conflicts
заметьте
and
говорили
difficult
и о
situations, and
перспективах
on the
палестино-израильского
margin I say that we
регулирования.
spoke about the
И когда я
future
говорю,
of
что мы
Palestino-Israeli
надеемся
settlement
на
as well.
нахождение политического решения
I said that we hope
ситуации
to find a
вокруг
political
Ирана,
solution to the
мы
situation around
действительно
Iran.
будем способствовать
Indeed,
тому,
we'll try to
чтобы ситуация
facilitate
не свалилась
for the situation not to tip
в
over
военный сценарий.
to the
Как
military
это
scenario.
сделать? Это уже задача
And
дипломатов.
how we do it,
И
that's the task
я
for
почувствовал,
diplomats.
что
And
у
I
американской
felt that
стороны
the
настрой
US
тоже на
side
поиск
has a
политического решения.
commitment to finding a political
Ситуация
solution.
сложная.
The situation
Мы,
is a complex
как
one.
вы знаете, не поддержали и
As you
считаем
know, we
ошибкой
did not
решение
support,
Соединенных
and we
Штатов
believe
выйти из
that it is a
совместного
mistake that the
всеобъемлющего
US
плана
decided to
действий.
withdraw from JCPOA.
И те меры, которые
And
правительство
those
США
measures that the
предпринимает,
US government
объявляя
is
санкции,
undertaking right now by
запрещающие
introducing
вообще
sanctions which prohibit
какие-либо дела иметь с Ираном.
and to
И
have
нефть
any
нельзя
deals with
покупать,
Iran. You
значит,
cannot buy
торговать с Ираном
oil,
теперь
you
уже
cannot
нельзя.
trade with Iran
Надеюсь,
at all.
что все-таки
I hope
мы вместе с
That
европейскими
we,
нашими
together
коллегами,
with our
вместе с
European
китайцами,
colleagues,
которые
with
тоже являются
our Chinese colleagues
участниками
who are also
договоренности о
party to the
совместном
agreement
всеобъемлющем плане
on
действий,
joint comprehensive
будем
plan of
в
action.
контактах с американскими
We'll keep in
коллегами
touch
искать
with
пути
our American
выхода
colleagues
из
and
этого
try to
кризиса,
find
потому
ways
что
out of this
пока мы
crisis.
только в эту
Because
воронку
right now we have
все
only
глубже и глубже
entered this
засасываемся.
spiral and
Я
we're
хочу
getting sucked into it.
воспользоваться тем, что у меня сейчас
I'd like to
микрофон,
use this
чтобы
opportunity that
затронуть тему,
I have the floor. I wanted
которую
to
вы
talk about the
адресовали
topic that
Майку Помпео
the question
утверждения
you addressed to
вмешательства Российской
Secretary Pompeo
Федерации
about the
в
interference
выборный
of the Russian
процесс в
Federation in
Соединенных
the
Штатах.
election process
Я передал
in the
Майку
US. I gave
сегодня
Mike
копию
today
статьи,
a
которая
copy
была
of an article
в Соединенных Штатах опубликована
that
в
was published in the United States
1987
in
году с
1987
предупреждением о том, что
with a
Советский
warning
Союз
that the Soviet Union
будет пытаться
is
повлиять
going
на
to
выборы
influence the elections,
президента США,
the
которые
presidential elections,
предстояли в
which were planned
1988
for
году. В статье, между
1988.
прочим,
The
впервые
article
было
actually
упомянуто о
mentioned for
политических
the first
амбициях
time
тогдашнего уже
about the
успешного
political
предпринимателя,
ambition of
бизнесмена
the
Дональда
then
Трампа. Поэтому тему
successful
эту можно
businessman
обсуждать
Donald Trump.
бесконечно.
So we
Но
can
пока у
discuss
нас
this
на столе
topic
не будет
forever.
конкретных
But
фактов,
until we have
мы не
cold,
сможем
hard facts on
по-взрослому
the table,
на
we
эту
cannot
тему
have a
разговаривать.
grown-up discussion about it.
Факты говорят о
The
том, что
facts tell us
никаких доказательств
that there is-
у тех, кто раздувает
There
эту
is no
тему, не
proof of
существует.
those who are trying
Мы
to
неоднократно
hype up
предлагали
this topic.
профессионально
We have
возобновить
mentioned several times that we
контакты
could have
по
a
проблемам
renewed professional
кибербезопасности,
contact
в
in
рамках которых
cybersecurity.
можно будет обсуждать
And within
любые
these contacts,
озабоченности,
we could discuss
возникающие у
any
одной стороны по
concerns that
отношению к другой,
one
атаки
party
на
has
наши
to another,
интернет-ресурсы.
attacks against
Львиная доля
against our internet
приходится на
resources.
источники на территории
They,
Соединенных Штатов Америки.
The
Поэтому
lion's
есть что
share of
обсуждать.
those attacks
А
come
если
from
говорить
the United
конкретно
States.
про последнюю президентскую
And when we
кампанию в
talk about the
США,
latest
то
presidential
у нас
campaign in
с
the
2013
US,
года
since
существовал и
2013,
существует
we used to have and we
канал
still have a
обмена
channel of
информацией
exchange
о
on
возможных
information about
непреднамеренных рисках,
possible
возникающих в
indeliberate
киберпространстве.
risks in
И с
cyberspace.
октября
And
2016
since
года,
October
когда
2016,
демократическая администрация
when the
Соединенных Штатов
Democratic
этот вопрос впервые
administration
подняла,
of the
по
United
январь
States raised this
2017
issue
года
for the
до
first time
инаугурации
till
Дональда
January
Трампа. По этому
2017
каналу
till
шел
Donald Trump
трафик
inauguration.
запросов
We
и
used to have
ответов.
traffic of
И
response
мы
and
предложили
requests of information,
не так давно,
and we have offered
когда
recently
нападки на Российскую
when the verbal
Федерацию в связи
attacks
с
against Russian
якобы имевшим
federations
место
that had to do
вмешательством в
with
выборы
the
достигли
alleged
апогея, мы предложили этот
in
обмен
elections reached their
сообщениями
ceiling. We
по
suggested
линии
that we
двух
could
структур, занимающихся
use this
избежанием инцидентов в
traffic
киберпространстве,
between these
опубликовать.
two
Я
special
сегодня об
centers
этом
that
Майку
deal with
напомнил. Администрация уже
cyberspace
теперь Трампа
threats. We
отказалась это
suggested
делать.
to
Я не
знаю,
знаю,
that,
кто
and I
принимал
mentioned that
решение,
to
но
Mike. Administration
публикация этих
refused to do
данных
so. I don't know who made
была
this decision.
заблокирована
However,
американской
the
стороной. Хотя по
publication of this
нашему
data was
убеждению,
blocked by the
придание их
American side.
гласности
But we believe
сняло бы
that
очень
making
большую
them
часть
public would
тех
alleviate a lot
измышлений,
of those
которые сейчас распространяются.
deliberations that are being
Мы не будем,
spread right now.
безусловно, в одностороннем
Naturally,
порядке
we will not
опубликовывать
act
эти
unilaterally,
переговоры,
we will not publish
но
them,
сам факт я
we will not
хотел
make
бы
them public.
зафиксировать.
But I'd like
И
to
еще раз
just to flag
подтверждаю,
this fact.
мы хотим, мы
Once again,
готовы с нашими
I'm saying
американскими
we're prepared,
партнерами
we are ready, we
заниматься
want to
проблемами,
deal with our
возникающими в
American colleagues with the
киберпространстве,
issues that appear in the
профессионально,
cyberspace through
без
professional
каких-либо эмоций,
dialogue,
без
with no
какой-либо
emotions,
политизации,
no
идеологизации,
political
тем более
jaundice,
без
with no
попыток делать эту
ideology,
тему
with
чуть
no
ли не главной во
attempts to make
внутриполитической
this
борьбе в Соединенных Штатах.
topic the main one in the domestic policy in the U.S.
Да, и я, кстати, прошу
And
прощения.
I'm sorry, by the way,
Я передал Майку
I gave Mike
неофициальный такой
an
меморандум,
unofficial,
как у нас
a
принято говорить
non-paper, an
по-английски,
unofficial memo,
который излагает не
and it
вымышленные,
lays out
а фактические подтверждения
relevant
вмешательства
actual
Соединенных Штатов
information
во
of
внутреннюю политику Российской
U.S.
Федерации,
interference in the domestic policy of the Russian
печально
Federation,
известный закон о
including the
поддержке
notorious
свободы на Украине,
law
как
on
так
support of
называется,
freedom in the
принятый
Ukraine.
Конгрессом,
It was
в котором
adopted by the
государственному
Congress,
секретарю
where the Secretary of State
поручается,
is
его
instructed,
обязывают заниматься
he's
продвижением
obligated to
демократии в
promote
России
democracy in Russia
напрямую и через работу с
directly
российскими неправительственными
through working with Russian
организациями, на каковые
NGOs,
цели ассигнуется $20
and
миллионов
$20 million have been
Это не
earmarked for that
вымыслы, это
annually.
документ,
That's
который
not
имеет форму закона Соединенных Штатов. Так
contemplations
что
or
мы готовы на
deliberation.
эту
This
тему
is
говорить.
a real law.
Здесь
We're
сидит
prepared to
посол,
talk on this topic.
уважаемый мной Джон
And
Хансман, который
His
тоже
Excellency,
знает, как
much respected by me,
непросто
Mr.
бывает
Huntsman,
работать
knows
в
how
России.
hard
Наш
it is to
посол в
work
США
in
тоже
Russia
знает
sometimes,
о
and our
проблемах, которые
ambassador in the
возникают.
U.S. also
Мы, в
knows
принципе,
that
за то,
about the
чтобы эти
issues
проблемы
that
снимать,
arise, and we
чтобы
want
все
to
те
alleviate those issues.
нагромождения
For all that
взаимных
accumulation of mutual
негативных действий,
negative
начатых
actions
Соединенными Штатами, на которые мы должны были
initiated by the United States
отвечать,
that we
чтобы
had
все
to
это устранить,
reciprocate,
и чтобы
to
дипломаты
alleviate that all,
работали
for the
транспарентно,
diplomats to work
открыто, в
transparently,
соответствии с
openly,
Венскими конвенциями о
according to the
дипломатических
Viennese
отношениях,
conventions on
и не
diplomatic
создавали
relations,
ощущение
without
у
creating
противоположной стороны, что кто-то
perception
пытается влиять
from
на
the other side that
внутриполитический
someone is
процесс.
trying to
Мы,
influence
кстати,
domestic political
привели
process.
сегодня в очередной
By the way,
раз
once again,
пример, когда в
we gave an example
1933 году
of
по инициативе
1933,
Соединенных
when the
Штатов
United States
президент Рузвельт
spearheaded
и
through
Народный
President
комиссар по
Roosevelt
иностранным делам
and
Литвинов обменялись нотами, в
People's,
которых обязались не
Commissioner
вмешиваться во
Mr.
внутриполитические
Litvinov
процессы друг
exchanged
друга.
notes where
Подчеркну
they
еще
committed
раз,
to
Соединенные Штаты были
non-interference in each
инициаторами
other's
этого обмена
processes.
нотами.
I'd like to highlight
Мы
once again,
уже
this
несколько
action
лет,
was
еще начиная
initiated
с
by the U.S.
администрации
For several
Обамы,
years
предлагаем
now,
нашим
starting with the
американским партнерам
Obama administration,
переподтвердить эту
we
договоренность.
suggested to our
Пока
partners
они
to
на это не
reconfirm
готовы.
that
Так что
commitment.
делайте
Right
выводы
now,
сами.
they're not prepared for that, so draw your own conclusions.
You can see we have some disagreements on this issue. I promise not to go back to history from the early 30s. But I made clear to Foreign Minister Lavrov, as we've made clear for the past months, that interference in American elections is unacceptable. If the Russians were to engage in that in 2020, it would put our relationship in an even worse place than it has been, and encourage them not to do that, that we would not tolerate that. You know, we've said this not only about the Russians, but about other countries as well. Our elections are important and sacred, and they must be kept free and fair, and with no outside country interfering in those elections. Your first question was about what we know about the attacks that took place off the United Arab Emirates. I don't have any information that I can share with you yet about the nature of what took place there. We're working diligently to get answers to what caused those ships to have the problems that they have today.
Ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes our press conference. Thank you for taking part in it.